Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Ford, and we are here for another poetry discussion, which will appear, of course, in the poetry discussion playlist here on the channel. The poem in question today, 13 Ways of Looking at a Blackbird by Wallace Stevens. This is one of Wallace Stevens' probably one of his most common poems, but I don't know that it is necessarily one of his most artistic poems. It is, in some ways, a bit of a cliche, which we will get to in the discussion part of this, but it is a very good way of going about that cliche, in my opinion. The poem itself reads as such. 1. Among 20 snowy mountains, the only moving thing was the eye of the blackbird. 2. I was of 3 minds, like a tree in which there are 3 blackbirds. 3. The blackbird whirled in the autumn winds. It was a small part of the pantomime. 4. A man and a woman are one. A man and a woman and a blackbird are one. 5. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after. 6. Icicles filled the long window with barbaric glass. The shadow of the blackbird crossed it to and fro. The mood traced in the shadow an indecipherable cause. 7. O thin men of Haddam, why do you imagine golden birds? Do you not see how the blackbird walks around the feet of the women about you? 8. I know noble accents and lucid, inescapable rhythms, but I know, too, that the blackbird is involved in what I know. 9. When the blackbird flew out of sight, it marked the edge of one of many circles. 10. At the sight of blackbirds flying in a green light, even the bawds of euphony would cry out sharply. 11. He rode over Connecticut in a glass coach. Once a fear pierced him, in that he mistook the shadow of his equipage for blackbirds. 12. The river is moving. The blackbird must be flying. 13. It was evening all afternoon. It was snowing, and it was going to snow. The blackbird sat in the cedar limbs. So, I think the most common way that this poem is sort of broken down is that it's about perspective. And fair enough. 13 ways of looking at a blackbird. I mean, just from the title alone, probably it could be inferred that perspective is going to be on the list of what we're talking about when we talk about 13 ways of looking at a blackbird. And I say that it's a little bit of a cliche because it is a list of different observations about a blackbird. And you get this all sorts of places. You don't have to have the Wallace Stevens poem about blackbirds to have this type of thing where there is a list of different viewpoints all on the same thing and none of them match, right? That obviously this is about perspective. But it doesn't have to stop there. This is about perspective. It's about perspective of the blackbird. But what do blackbirds represent? Well, we don't know exactly what blackbird we're talking about. There is the common parlance blackbird, which could be blackbirds, something literally called a blackbird. There is a uh, red-winged blackbird, or I think that's what it's called. There is a rusty blackbird. There is I think it's called a European blackbird. Then, and we're not even talking about, well, do you want to talk about crows? They're black. Do you want to talk about ravens? They're black. Are we talking about bluebirds or blue jays, right? The same type of question. Are we talking about the sort of regular word blackbird or not? Regardless, kind of, they are always the same types of things. Well, maybe not always, but often the same types of things as far as what does our classic symbolism say about them. Oftentimes, a blackbird is a mystery. Oftentimes, a blackbird represents some type of wisdom. Oftentimes, a blackbird represents some type of omen. And many more things, too. Those are just the three big ones, right? Anytime you mention any bird that's black, mystery, wisdom, and omen will almost indelibly enter the conversation. So, do we have 13 ways of looking at a blackbird? Or do we have 13 ways of discussing mystery? Do we have 13 ways of discussing wisdom? Do we have 13 ways of discussing what an omen means? There is the one of these. Where are we at here? 11. He rode over Connecticut in a glass coach. Once a fear pierced him, in that he mistook the shadow of his equipage for blackbirds. You living in fear of wisdom here? Maybe. Maybe there's something that you don't want to be found out. Are you living in fear of mystery here? That seems understandable. Or are you freaking out because you thought everything was going well and all of a sudden there is an omen afoot? Right? So now, all of a sudden, each of these 13 ways of looking at a blackbird becomes 13 or becomes 3 in their own right ways of interpreting what the blackbird is. And I mean, interpreting what the blackbird represents in number 11 here tells us nothing about the blackbird, right? The blackbird here, depending on what you decide that blackbird represents, tells you an awful lot about the he in question, doesn't it? If we read the blackbird as representing wisdom, that fear that gets to him tells us that the he in question may be smuggling something, right? If we are interpreting the blackbird as an omen, the he in question, it probably tells us he's a religious man, doesn't it? Someone who is not a religious person or does not believe in some type of deity probably will not believe in any type of omen. So all of a sudden, 13 ways of looking at a blackbird becomes 13, 26, 39 ways of interpreting the he in any of these stories, any of the observers, we should say. This one, so here I think the interpretation of the blackbird lends itself more, with more credibly towards being an omen. Here, I would think that it would be wisdom. O thin men of Haddam, why do you imagine golden birds? Do you not see how the blackbird walks around the feet of the women about you? This would be saying, why are you spending all of your time with your head in the clouds, hoping for X, Y, and Z, plotting on how to do A, B, and C, when you have the wealth of the land, the blackbird here, walking around the feet of the women about you? That story lends itself more, in my opinion, towards the wisdom interpretation of the blackbird. But it's funny how in a poem that is almost clearly meant to be an expression of the multitude of perspectives, one of those perspectives commonly is sort of asserted as wisdom. So we have, in some ways, a poem about the wisdom of accepting different perspectives. But oftentimes, if you were to take to the interweb, if you were to take to your local university professors, sort of the run of offices for the English literature department, and ask them what this poem is about, ask the internet what this poem is about, probably perspective is where it would stop. But perspective, well, that's not the depth of it. The depth of it is the wisdom. The depth of it is who believes in omens. The depth of it, how much do we like a good mystery? What is there to be said for and against mystery? That is what we have here. So that's what I have for this poetry discussion. If you like or appreciate what it is that I do here, hitting the like button really does help me out, as it tells YouTube to share this video with other literature lovers. If you find yourself here by chance but not design, literature is the only thing I talk about on this channel, dropping multiple videos a week, and I hope to have you back for the next one.